Welcome everyone to the fourth session of the third conference in the sequence that the International Committee of Architectural Critics has organized. I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the co-organizers, Tongji University and the Tongji Institute of Architects. The topic of the conference is architecture as built criticism, and we've had three very interesting, very revealing, and quite rich set of presentations in the first three sessions. Today we have a series of presentations, and I'm going to give over to Ruth Vergisijn in a moment. But I just wanted to reiterate my thanks to members of the scientific committee who have been very, very helpful in mentoring our authors, our presenters, who have all expressed their thanks in response to this process. And I think that it's a measure of our mutual interest in the improvement of our own skills and professionalism, that we take this care and interest in helping each other in developing our positions and papers and our intellectual capacities. So thank you, members of the scientific committee. I'd like to thank the authors for their interest in submitting their abstracts and for engaging in this round of selection process. Congratulations to all of you who have been accepted and who are going through this rigorous process, at the end of which we are going to have a book. I'd like to thank members of the audience who are most welcome in asking questions and making comments. We have 1 hour at the end of this session for an extended discussion, a roundtable with everyone. And the wonderful advantage of Zoom is that the person who raises her or his hands first gets aligned in this and on the screen, and there is an absolutely fair system that everybody who raises her or his hand will have the opportunity to speak. So I encourage you to engage in the discussion. Thank you very much, Ruth, who is not only a member of SICA, but also a member of the board of directors. Thank you for your willingness to be the session chair. Ruth and I have had a number of interesting teaching engagements with our students. We enjoyed a kind of combined seminar during the COVID periods. And that, I think, was a kind of a test run for something of this scale of an international conference, online conference. And I believe while it's always nice to meet people in person, there is a great advantage of using this kind of technology by allowing lots of people across the world to come together at one particular time in the moment of the year. These recordings will be placed online so that they can be used and as references in the future. They are not edited, so it's an unadulterated version. And you can compare that, if you want, to the final presentations in the books. But anyway, thank you, Ruth, and the floor is yours. You are now the session chair. Thank you.
Good morning or afternoon or night for everybody. And thank you, Wilfred, for inviting me to share this session. It's a huge pleasure to be here with all of you. So let's begin, not to keep on schedule. This session, we're going to have 5 papers. I'm going to present each presenter a very brief resume of please close your microphones. So I'm going to make a very brief resume of each of the presenter, and then you have 15 minutes. When there is only 1 minute to finish, I'll send you a message or interrupt you, sorry, so that we can keep on schedule. And then we have 5 minutes for some questions, very brief questions, because we have another time in the end, as Wilfred has said. So let's begin with our first presentation. Yifei Zhang is from Harvard University in Cambridge, United States. He has a master in design studies and at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. His area of specialty is Wittgenstein's ethics and aesthetics. And he works with Friedrich Nietzsche, architectural regionalism, Kantian aesthetics, Hannah Arendt, the Frankfurt School, and his Bachelor of Architecture by the Rice University and Bachelor of Arts also by the Rice University. And so thank you very much, Yifei Zhang, for a presentation. I have read it. It's very interesting, as you're going to see soon. Please share your screen, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left, okay?
Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Or hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe full screen? Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Ruth Bader-Zine, for your kind introduction. And before I begin, I want to express my gratitude for Professor Robert McCarter from Washington University in St. Louis for guiding me through writing this paper, as well as this presentation, as well as Professor Wilfred Wong for reading through my draft and giving me valuable suggestions. So my definition of architecture as built criticism starts from a critique of the reductive approach that sees architecture singularly as text to be read. I see this idea kind of implicit in many of our previous presenters. And here in this diagram, I'm trying to show that textual manifestation is only one of the many facets of architecture, and to read a built building is to reduce it to a text. What differs architecture as criticism from criticism on paper is its transcendence from the textual form. To accept architecture as at least exclusively legible criticism, we have to first accept the reductive metaphor of architecture as text, which, even if valid, only equates built forms with unbuilt projects. If architecture can critique, such criticism must not come only from reading. The emphasis on reading is perhaps symptomatic of we as designers' temptation to explain. Buildings are firstly to be lived rather than to be read, and reading or a prescribed meaning are more than likely the didactic narrative of design, the declared intention. A text demands a writer, and thus to read is to be at least distracted by the master narrative, reducing buildings as footnotes to theories. And here I want to highlight Alan Colquhoun's argument against determinism in modern architecture, as he pointed to the insufficiency of functional optimization as a design strategy seen in modernism. As here quoted on the left side of the page, the literature of modern architecture is full of statements which indicate that after all the new operational needs have been satisfied, there is still a wide area of choice in the final configuration. So this idea is recreated here through the diagram on the top right of the slide, which illustrates that a singular design method, like functional optimization, cannot lead to one final design. And this discovery of the insufficiency of biotechnical determinism can be understood as more than just a simple critique of modernism, but a wider critique of the textual reductions. Like functionalism cannot lead to a singular design, declared intentions of all kinds. So here it can either be formal autonomy, sustainability, or functionalism cannot singularly account for a built project. The interpreted textual meanings cannot exhaust the totality of the building. Architecture is not only a representation of these ideas. There's always something beyond these declared intentions, and it's particularly what is beyond architecture's message that I argue architecture has proper agency to formulate criticism. The gap between the entirety of architecture and that of its various textual manifestations is where the building, supposedly a mere physical object, serves its agency as built form. Architecture is condition, but also conditions. So in my presentation, as well as my paper, I explore a form of architecture as criticism that breaks away from the process of reading and focuses on scrutinizing architecture's outward manifestation of power toward its users rather than inculcating architectural literacy inwardly for its readers. This approach moves away from projecting the designer's intention onto our perception of a building or analysis of drawings and focuses on the building's effect in shaping its user's life and habit. It is this emphasis on exteriority, on effect, and on the outward manifestation that the stance of this paper is pragmatic. And from this pragmatic understanding of architecture derives my definition of a pragmatic criticism by architecture. And to me, architecture can only work as criticism. A building is critical only when it critiques, when it actively renders its object of criticism improper. The power of architecture as criticism thus differs from a textual criticism expressed by its author. Textual criticism is the representation of the architect, yet in a pragmatic criticism, the building asserts its own agency. In this sense, if the building creates a better quality of life, we can say it is a critique of history, which makes the condition of living prior to its completion improper. Similarly, we can say a built building can critique a type by acting as a parody or an exemplar. And here in number 3, if a building renders the exterior uninhabitable, it can be regarded as a critique of climate or environment. And in fact, I will argue a majority of buildings would qualify as this critique number 3. The human will to self-preservation and flourishment by creating insulated shelters and later well-tempered interiors, the raison d'être of architecture is in itself such a critique. And this critique, however, is not presented by decoded symbolism, but the behavioral fact that mankind has continued to build and transform the surface of the earth. And for my case study, I analyzed the Brockstein Pavilion on the campus of Rice University in Houston, Texas, which is also my own alma mater. I chose this building really because I personally interact with it regularly, and it's still more or less kind of an anonymous project in the broader conscience of the architectural world. And I would argue that my personal anecdotal experience of interacting with this building and my absence of knowledge from the designer's perspective makes it a perfect case study for my pragmatic approach. So a bit of context, Rice University was founded in 1912 in Houston, originally a school exclusively to the white students of Houston when it was founded. When it was founded on the wealth of William Marsh Rice, who made his fortune by providing supplies to plantation owners and selling cotton and sugar crops produced in large part by enslaved labor. And ever since its founding, the architecture of this campus has been laden with the invitation to meaning and to be read. Iconographies off the Mediterranean were deployed in the wilderness of Texas to claim the continuity with the high cultural traditions of Western Europe. And specifically in this one example, you can see this colonnade in Texas is almost a perfect replica from that of the Ducal Palace in Venice, which only reduces itself to a sign, a signifier to implicate a continuity of European high culture, to such a degree that what the building actually produces is seldomly studied. And this is exactly the kind of textual reductivism that I was critiquing earlier. Another example here, you can see the facade of a building that is covered with all of these symbolism. The Star of Texas, the floral motifs, a relief of Minerva that symbolizes wisdom, and of course, the inscription, which is literally text written on a building. It's really a deluge of information waiting to be read. Indeed, the architecture of this campus was so eager to be read and to be understood that there are books to help readers decode the occult symbols dwelling in the buildings. The abundance of architectural text also produced a consistent architectural language as the vessel for meaning. So here you can see already on this facade, the language is the red brick, the stucco, and the marble, a language that has been spoken from the earliest neo-Gothicism to all the way to the postmodernist. But the birth of a language also begets myth and fictions. So time has very little on a campus where buildings from the 1910s, 1990s, and 2020s are stylistically indistinguishable. It is worth recalling that even the original 1910s buildings are signifiers to fictional ancestries themselves. When reading only gives us anachronistic neurosis and only signals to fabricated pedigree, we are forced to return to observe what they do pragmatically. It is in this context of overwhelming symbolism that the Broxton Pavilion stands out. Indeed, this building has very little to offer for reading. It is a small aluminum and glass structure that houses a cafe. And as you can see here, there is no Mediterranean iconography whatsoever. It is dashingly simple, but it's too late to be modern. It's built in 2009. So what the Broxton Pavilion critiques is multifaceted. Before the pavilion's inception, its site was a monotonous grass plain, a lot space which fell prey to the mid-century ethos of suburban America that was once described by a historian as a soggy backyard. The pavilion's critique of history comes in its complete reconstruction of this previously lost space into a bustling gathering space, as you can see here on campus. The success of his critique is self-evident in its popularity, which extends to the outdoors. Today, it is a cheerful meeting ground for concerts, frisbee, and club events. The Broxton Pavilion dissolves the campus' singular nucleus at the academic quadrangle on the right by raising the liveliness of the central quadrangle on the left. So already from this satellite view, you can see the academic quadrangle is poorly shaded and have these kind of formulaic French gardens, and the central quadrangle is on the left is populated by trees, and the square you see is the pavilion in the middle. In the scorching sun, there is no shade other than shadows of monuments, architectural or statuesque. The academic quad admonishes loitering and demands veneration. And if you know Houston, here it's almost 40 degrees during the summer. In the academic quad, the division between solid and void is absolute. The academic quad is picture perfect. It can be appreciated only by its instantaneous visual power recreated infinitely by promotional materials. The behavior fostered by this academic quad is its popularity among Houstonians photographing for weddings, engagements, and quinceañeras. The dignified monumentality endorses only the most ceremonial occasions, the most ritualistic attires, and the most enduring commemoration. And in almost the same perspective as the last photograph, you can see here the central quadrangle, on the contrary, produces something other than just the picturesque instance. The Broxton Pavilion and the landscape transformed the glaring sunlight into dappled vibrancy under the shades of elms and oaks, and recreated architecturally through the pavilion's brise-soleil canopy. The total transparency of Broxton and its generous canopy blurs the line between the interior and exterior, dissolving architecture's solidity within a leafy landscape. In addition to its glass cladding, the brightness is carried indoors through the angled skylights and the perforated ceiling. Its openness can also be felt in its accessibility. Broxton's transparency recalls Farnsworth House or the Glass House by Philip Johnson, but it sits on no podium and can be accessed from all four sides. And transparency prepares for those entering by displaying the code of conduct inside. So inside, people are drinking coffee, reading a book, or staring at their laptop. And to go inside, you don't need to swipe an ID. So it's indeed a space that is open to anyone. And this small detail actually makes a huge difference on the psychology of visitors onto a campus like this one, where surveillance, control, and accessibility are constantly present. I want to highlight this detail simply because it's one of the things that we don't really talk about in architectural discourse. It's not associated with design very commonly, but it still plays a very big part in how this space is perceived. The insalubrious Texan climate has been relieved at the central quadrangle with a diffused effulgence and hospitable breeze, allowing people to enjoy the outdoors in the Texas climate. The atmosphere here is temperate and jovial. The experience at the central quadrangle was intensified through the richness of sensations, arousing the auditory, which is this, you can hear the swaying trees and the falling water of the fountain, the haptic, which is a variegated brown texture of the landscape, and the olfactory, which is smell of the coffee and pastry inside the pavilion, and they're really delicious. Here in the central quadrangle orchestrates a polyphony of senses that stimulates its users, which resists the singular flat understanding of architecture as text. The Broxton Pavilion and its landscapes thus fosters a new communal life. To speak in Walter Benjamin's language, the pavilion is perceived gradually by habit. Along the landscape, it exerts everyday influence on a distracted public that uses it in the long run. Such a new life is staged and conditioned by the built elements and is put onto its most conspicuous display. It is a life that's much more genteel, much more refined and lighthearted, much less provincial, much less self-ingratiating and self-righteous, much less anxious about identity and meaning. And perhaps the effect of this critique, the staging of the new academic life, was to lay bare the message so eager to be read formerly. The Occidental iconography was instrumental to an institution that was founded upon slave capital and for the exclusive benefit of white Houstonians when it opened its doors. Architecture and landscape in this way only put a veneer of culture on a fortune, transforming slave capital into academic capital. Thus, all the meaning expressed through architecture and landscape by the early 20th century architects are instrumental to an ideology that today we can no longer tolerate. Through Braxton Pavilion, the production of a much more genteel life in the academia, delivered by the kaleidoscopic central power of architecture, cannot stand the self-righteous monumentality that singularly privileges reading, message, and memorializing. A dozen years after the pavilion's completion, the university has decided to remove Rice's statue from the center of the academic quad, for those living in this new life can no longer sustain even the most desperately diluted and secularized idolatry. And here I finish my presentation, and I would like to listen to some comments or any questions.
Thank you, Ife. You're just in time, and you even have 1 minute spared. So I shouldn't have. I would like to say that I was there. I went to Rice University for a visit, and I can testify that all that you are saying is true. And I like it very much. Your approach, our pragmatic approach, it's very dear to me. So I would like to hear if there is any questions, comments from the audience, please. Please raise your hand or put your question in the chat if you want, if you prefer. No questions, no. I have a question, but I'm waiting for, okay, Elias, please.
I think Wilfred was first. No? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I would like to actually just say, I think your theoretical beginnings were very helpful. I'd like to, though, dispel the impression that you may have received from the title of the conference. Architectural as built criticism does not exclude other forms of communication. The fact that buildings can be read as a text is one thing. Of course, there are all sorts of other ways by which architecture communicates other than text. And I think you've made that quite clear in your analysis. So just to set that point straight.
Thank you. If I may respond to that, I think I absolutely agree. I think what I'm trying to do to highlight what is beyond the textual meaning of architecture is, in my perspective and a balancing act. I think in my academic training, I see kind of a privilege of the textual understanding of architecture as a kind of more privileged and more important fact. And I just want to highlight the other side.
Elias, please.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation. And a question has arisen for me from that. The comparison made between the pavilion and the main Rice University building, I think maybe it's a bit tenuous. Not only a difference of time, but there's a difference of typology, content, and the symbolic content of the main university building compared to the use and function and aspirations of a pavilion is different. Would you not agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. They are very different buildings built in very different times, serving polar opposite functions. That's why I think it's interesting to compare and contrast, even if I'm not putting them on the same ground and kind of analyzing them in the same function. But from a user's perspective, or from the kind of perspective that people interact with them, they generate very different kind of experience when people interact with them, not just the visual or the meaning that they're trying to produce, but also comfort, or also the kind of atmosphere or mood when people interact with them, even given the fact that they have very different meaning. And functions.
That came through, and it was very powerful and interesting. Just one tiny observation: while I was listening to your presentation, completely different building came to mind, which is full of symbolism, even though it's not iconographic, and that's the Jewish Museum in Berlin by Libeskind.
Right.
And their symbolism was even had to be read by the signs made by the architect. So just to leave it at that. Thank you very much.
I was actually thinking about sorry.
There is a question from the audience, which is amazing, but I was going to do the same question. When you say that this building is too late to be modern, which is something you said on passage, maybe we have to update our definitions of modern instead of saying that this is too late to be modern. And what do you think about that?
Right. I think my response to that would be that it seems there's, especially at Rice, a kind of American lineage of this kind of linear progression of architecture. So when it's built in 2009, it's actually after this deluge of postmodern architecture that's happened on Rice campus. So we have Ricardo Bofill, we have, I'm blanking right now, but if you go to our campus, there are so many postmodern building that's built in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but somehow this 2009 building just happened, and it's hard to relate that to the modernism which happened long before all the postmodern buildings. So that's what I mean. It's hard to say that modernism is over or modern is over, but just through that kind of linear understanding of the American architecture history in the 20th century, it is too late to be modern.
Okay, we can discuss that even more in the end, but now we have to keep on because we are just in time. So we keep on discussing that for in the end the discussion. So now, thank you very much, Yijiang. Now I'm going to pass to Algimantas Grigas. Let me read here. Sorry for a moment. Yeah, Algimantas Grigas. Again, he's from Kaunas University of Technology in Lithuania, a history of arts postgraduate student with interests in architecture of Soviet Lithuania, phenomena of architectural criticism and modernism of the 20th century. He has 7 years experience as a professional tour guide, specializing in the modernist architecture of Kaunas from the 1920s to 1940s. And prior to the start of his academic career, he has independently developed cultural and artistic projects as a coordinator of non-governmental organizations, as well as a freelance specialist. He has an academic background and professional career as an architect, and his text will be, in his presentation will be, the Embassy of Estonia in Vilnius as a sign of the change in the architectural ideals and development of criticism in Lithuania. Thank you very much, Algimantas. I'm going to warn you when you have 1 minute to finish your presentation, okay?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well and you can see the presentation in full screen. So first of all, I would like to thank all the scientific committee and the organizers of this conference. I'm really grateful to be here. I would like specifically to thank my mentors, Professor Wilfred Wong and Associate Professor Morten Jørgensen from Royal Danish Academy for helping me to update and better my work. Today, I will try to use my 15 minutes and speak freely, as encouraged by Professor Wilfred, not to read too much, and I will try to do more of an improvised free talk, because I'm feeling that this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I have been working around this project, and it coincided with the topic of the conference, architecture as built criticism, and in a moment I will explain you why. First of all, I would like to say that a lot of my research, which I pursue in my postgraduate degree, is about architectural criticism and the authority of an architect. And I base a lot of my thoughts on thinker Wayne Atoya, an architectural critic from United States of America, and his book, Architecture and Critical Imagination. And the quote, the beginning of the quote, "The key to achieving the understanding of criticism as a tool, not as a threat, is to see criticism as behavior, not as judgment." End of the quote. And I have been thinking a lot about this, and I think when we see architecture as built criticism, the act of criticizing is also visiting it. And I have heard through the previous presentations a lot. I think these are two components are very important: visiting and seeing and touching and experiencing the building, and also realizing that architects are not the sole creators of architecture, seeing the wider picture and reflecting on yesterday's presentation. I think it's very important to see who commissioned the architecture, who commissioned the buildings. So here we start, we roll on with a little introduction in geography. Here we have the Baltic Sea. Along it, we have the 3 Baltic states. On the left side, you can see some key dates. As you can see, all 3 countries share the first Declaration of Independence and later Declaration of Independence from the Soviet Union. And my interest lies in the relationship between Estonia and Lithuania. And here you can see the capitals as they have been connected by a live human chain in 1989 to declare in a peaceful way that the 3 Baltic states are aiming to disconnect from the Soviet Union, to end the occupation of the Soviet Union. And following the 1991 independence, we have Estonia, which decides to build a new embassy in Vilnius. In this story, I have only 2 protagonists that are worth of remembering. First of them is Valvė Strikaitė, the first ambassador to Lithuania. And she has pursued and helped a lot in finding a site for the Estonian embassy. So very quick introduction. Here are the key buildings in Vilnius, Old Town of Vilnius, and then the main pedestrian avenue, the Parliament of Lithuania, built in the late socialist modernist period, and on the other side of the river in a peaceful wooden villa area of Žvėrynas appears a new Estonian embassy. This Estonian embassy, the timeline is from 1996, when the architectural competition is announced. 34 participants take part in it. The 3+1 architects, who are very young at the time, just 24 years each of the 4, and their proposal was not an immediate winner. It was a heated debate, and following a vote of 6 against 5, this project has been selected, which explores the perimeter build-up and the courtyard typology. And here is the building itself, and I will briefly present the building and then move on to the analysis of the context, because it is very important to understand the time. 1996, and the building is finished in 1998, and at that time the context is completely different to what this building has proposed or demonstrated. Here we can see the front and the back elevations of the building. The front of the building is decorated in limestone, typical Estonian Ungru stone, which is declared national stone, lightly painted in light blue by impregnation material. And in the back, we see the first in the Baltic states frameless glass wall. A number of technological innovations have been introduced in this building. And here you can see the comparison of the section of the building, which shows the innovative proposal by the architects to design a building without the corridors, where each level represents a different space, and the shift in the half floor allows this smart layout of the building. On the right side, you can see a picture with some snow. As you may know, the snow and the white is one of the Estonian national flags. So this play with the colors is imminent here. And then we can have a look at the plans of the building. Here, the building demonstrates functional layout, where the users are prioritized. We have the administrative functions of the embassy, offices, and 3 apartments where the ambassador and the visitors can be hosted. In the basement, we have a sauna, a typical room in the Nordic cultures. And we have the events hall in the courtyard, a big glass cube, which filters the daylight in a very specific way. And with the views of this room, I will end the presentation. And this is the building again from the exterior. It does not look too old, as Estonian architecture historian Mark Kalm, when he visited the building in some 2010 conference in Vilnius, he noted that the building is aging very well. There are not many things that have been changed, and it functions exactly the same way as the architects intended in the beginning. There were some criticism for the building, of course, like this open balcony that you can see in the back elevation. It was covered with a metal curtain, which caused too much noise, and it had to be removed. Also, the big frameless glass wall had to be additionally glued with a sunproof sticker, because during the construction, the cost saving has been implemented by the political decision, and the wrong type of glass has been used for the back elevation. But nevertheless, continuing to the context, stepping onto the context, here we can see the assemblage of the posters by the Lithuanian architecture students in 1983, a yearly architectural student competition. And here we can see the first competition of its kind, where the postmodernist ideas prevailed. And many of the architects participating in these early student architectural ideas, they are famous, well-known architects today. They followed the postmodernist ideas, but it's important to note that in Lithuania, the postmodernism was of a different kind. I hope that in other countries, in Latvia and Estonia, in a similar way, but Lithuanian researchers has summed up that to the east of the Iron Curtain, the postmodernist architecture was fighting a different kind of a fight. And later I will try to explain why. And to start on the story, how much trouble this Estonian embassy has caused, I wanted to show you the cover page of the first architectural press, the Architectas. This is following the 1991 Declaration of Independence. This was the very first of its paper publication, concentrating on architectural criticism. And here we can see the caricature of the Estonian embassy with the neighboring building. And if we look more closely, we can see that by an unknown architect, the caricature sums up the story of the architecture in the last decade of the 20th century in the Baltic states. We can see the Lithuania on the left side, Latvia in the middle, and then Estonia as super modern and striking modern building. Below we have another variation of the caricature, and here we can see the Lithuanians lining up for visas to the modern European architecture, as it says. And here are some of the pictures from the official release of this first architectural criticism publication, Architectas, and later Statybų pilotas. And here on the left side, we can see architect Eugenius Milunas, who is one of the few architects who managed to shed the postmodernist trends and become a truly modern architect. So he changed the trends. And to sum up, you might be a little bit confused at the moment because I'm introducing the new context of Lithuania to you. Here I have tried to sum it up and show you. Beginning on the left side, you can see the typical socialist modernist architecture, which is repetitive, using reinforced concrete panels, using the same materials, the same products everywhere, and tired of this lack of personal expression following the 1988, when the personal constructions were allowed in the city centers, and following the independence, the postmodernist architecture exploded. A lot of these pictures in the middle are actually do-it-yourself constructions, sometimes exempting the need of an architect. And on the right side, you can see the Estonian embassy, and 2 years later, the Hanover Expo Pavilion, which was another shocking building. But in my proposal, Estonian embassy was the reactant in a larger activity of the change of architectural ideals in Lithuania and later in other countries, because 3+1 architects later became really successful and well-known architects in Estonia, but in Lithuania they have caused also a lot of impact. It is not a direct impact, not many Lithuanian architects admit it, but everyone remembers it. When you ask the current leading architects in Lithuania, they remember the furor that the Estonian embassy has caused. And here is another illustration from another point of view. This corner building, which stands just next to the Estonian embassy, it was built practically at the same time, 1997, typical of postmodernist trends, a lot of quotes of the historical architecture, and not a very high quality architecture today, but it's really helping me to explain the situation, as these two buildings were built at the same time in completely different styles. When the Estonian embassy appeared, there were many articles in Lithuania with furious titles like The Fridge or A Prison, or Beasts on 2 feet are destroying the Žvėrynas neighborhood. But also in Estonian context, this is another entry to the Estonian embassy proposal, very postmodernist one. And here are some pictures of the recent exhibition that I just found out that has just ended in Estonia, about the Estonian embassies around the world. And Lithuanian embassy is just one of the 3 built abroad, purpose-built embassies. And here I would like to finish off my presentation with the views towards the event hall in the Estonian embassy.
Thank you very much, just on time. Well, we have 5 minutes for some questions or comments. Anyone would like to begin? Some compliments there. Any questions right now?
Elias has.
Yes, Elias, please.
Yes, I was looking forward to listening to your presentation, because, again, continuing from yesterday, we have a very important political context within which you present this building. So my question to you is, do you think, I don't know if you attended yesterday's presentation, we had one by Busra on
Yes.
Egli and Eldem. So would you say that modern architecture through the embassy, as you presented it in Vilnius, is a conquest, was a conquest, rather than an import, as we saw the case of Egli in Turkey? Conquest of modernism as something positive rather than as an import that, you know, we're not so sure about it. There's a them on the other side.
Remembering yesterday's presentation from Busra, Egli was from another country, and there's a main difference. Here we have Estonian architects delivering Estonian modernist architecture abroad. And as Mart Kalm also noted in another article, that the architects, they were young, idealistic architects, and their intention to build good quality architecture coincided with the national political views of the time, the need to represent young Estonian state, still relatively poor at the time, using this ingenious modern construction. So it's the same modernist architecture, but used in a little bit different context and different actors, I would say.
The reason, if I may, the reason why I posed the question in this way is because of that very interesting photograph you showed with the Soviet buildings, the postmodernist decade, and then the embassy. There seems to be, with all its contradictions and contrasts, a linear development. The case of Turkey that we saw yesterday, even though one was Austrian, as you say, and the other one was Turkish, was that there was a dilemma of what to choose at a specific point under a regime, and whether modernist was then considered as an import or a modernization or whatever. That's why I framed the question in this way. But thank you.
Morten has a question. Please, Morten, make it short, because I'm sorry I have to do this. So we have to keep on schedule, but so please make your question very short.
Sure. Thank you very much, Algimantas. It was really great to hear this gathered in a presentation as well. I'm curious to hear, I think you very convincingly show that this architecture is expressions of different ways of developing as countries at this important time in history. Now, quite some time have gone since this building was constructed. So I would be curious to hear your view on how things have developed since then. Does architecture still represent different ways of approaching this development question?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Maybe you can think on that and answer in the final debate, because we are already on time. So I'm so sorry I have to be at the bad girl here, but let's keep on.
Okay, that's very understandable. Thank you, Morten. I will write down your question.
You answer in the end. Okay, thank you. So now let's pass on to Jan Wren. Jan Wren is from the Sheffield University in Britain. Dr. Jan Wren is a lecturer, assistant professor in the architecture at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture since 2018, and co-founder of RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects Chartered Practice Studio Cloud since 2016. He is currently the school's director of Architectural Humanities Research Group, the founder of the Peter Blundell Jones Library, and the former director of MA Architectural Design Program from 2020 to 2022. Thank you very much, Jan Wren. You have 15 minutes. I warn you when you have 1 minute left, okay?
Thank you very much, Ruth, for your introduction. And I'm sharing my screen, and to also extend my acknowledgement to all of you and your team to organize this wonderful conference, and also to thank you for my individual mentor, Professor Jalia Galia, for her advice at my paper at a very early stage. So my topic is about the architecture critic's own house as built criticism, with a focus on the late British architecture critic Peter Bloom-Jones and his own family house, Padley Mill, near Sheffield. So Peter Bloom-Jones is a prominent British architecture critic and academic. He died early at 67, but in his long teaching career spanning across 40 years, including 22 years as a professor at Sheffield, Peter Bloom-Jones wrote about 15 books, not counting foreign editions, and nearly 600 articles published in 47 journals spread over 13 countries. So we are familiar with lots of his interventions in particular in the modern architecture scene here, from the early work of Eric Murales or like the Hugo Herring and Hans Scharoun, both monographs are coming from a RIBA exhibition before, and Eric Goulart Aspland, and also lots of relatively lesser known architects in the Central Europe, for example, the Peter Hubler and Gala Bellish and the Austria School, all showing here. So he's a prominent architecture critic, and he often offered numerous local and national international lectures on architecture history, theory, and criticism, and also design, and with a focus on architects' own work. So he has a very strong ability to get directly straight to the heart of the matter, and always have a very clear vision in the key issues of architecture, for example, the spatial sequence or the habitation. And it was said that he could read a plan at 30 paces and notice a bullshit at 60. And so this is an extraordinary career as architecture critic, but it somehow overshadowed Peter Bloom-Jones as an architecture designer, which he has done a dozen of works, which I'm going to focus on because I think there's a hidden and fragile collection between his very shiny academic criticism work and his relatively overshadowed architecture design work to foster a collection on our conference theme, architecture as built criticism. So the fundamental concept of architecture for Peter Bloom-Jones is that it is a human discipline, and the key inquiry is always about how people come together through architecture. And this is related to his education, of course. That was in 1960s when he did his training in Architecture Association under James Gowan, who is a key collaborator of James Stirling for a long time. And at that time, the so-called orthodox modernism had reached a crisis because buildings had become construction-driven, ignoring issues of context and meaning. So he discovered that alternative organic strand of modernism, which showcased in the past slides of those books, but also that provokes his fundamental interest in everyday life of everyday communities, basically in participation and in the vernacular. And that leads into his further interventions through movement and rituals and based on architectural and topological approaches. So one of his earliest and also central critique in the early 2000s, based on the work on Hugo Herring, is focused on that kind of crisis of modern architecture with a predominant focus on the function and construction and also regulation and bureaucracy, which made architecture further and further away from the place and people they should serve. And that is what he mentioned, the battle is still on. So he always trying to criticize architecture design, particularly in Britain 20 years ago, which is kind of a server of unthinking utilitarianism and the self-conscious fashion statement. So he doesn't think architecture belongs to either function-based or art-based, but it is a practical art based on use. And that is his key intervention into the kind of style wars in architecture, particularly addressed further by the then Prince Charles when he criticized modern architecture in favor of a return to classic and vernacular British architecture. I think at that time it went into a peak in terms of that style war. But I think Peter Bloom-Jones' central critique is wanted to return architecture criticism to its fundamentals and to its basics on place and people and purpose. So particularly his legacy on organic modernism has a very strong focus on that tacit persistence, which is referenced from the intervention on the specific issue, organic living tradition in the architecture review. By the way, I would say on the same year, he won the SICA awards for the best periodicals of the past 3 years, 1985 to 88. So the tacit persistence of the tradition explains the evident loss of quality between the work of pioneers and that of the later generations, mostly the post-war and trained in a rather functional-based program because of the efficiency, also the timelessness lead at that time. But I think the idea is to recover and reinterpret modern architecture in a larger and alternative way, rather than looking at that as a kind of a stable plateau, but also rather than looking at it as something, irrelevant. Instead, Peter Bloom-Jones wanted to look at and reframe modernism as a kind of living tradition, always in a continuous and continuing evolution. And that is something he would brand organic modernism, which extend beyond those we know, for example, from Bruce Zervey's book on Frank Lloyd Wright, Arto, Eric Mendes, and these are all Peter Bloom-Jones' heroes. But also he returned architecture, organic modernism into the earlier arts and crafts in Great Britain. For example, his heroes, William Morris, John Ruskin, William Richard Lassaby, and he shared a core interest with these arts and crafts heroes in the everyday, in the handmade, in the human trace, in the as found and the social commitment, the poetic production, and the opposition to the kind of overly predominant architecture academic production based on calculations and styles or proportions. So PBJ meeting Sheffield, of course, it is in the middle of his career when he was about 45 years old. Went to the Sheffield, that was a thriving post-industrial hub in the north of England, and he started to look at the city in its peak time in the Industrial Revolution, which resulted in a long research-led teaching project on the left picture. That is the Sheffield 1900 project. And this is a photograph of 1998 when the project just started. Rebuild the 1900 Sheffield version in 1:500, and every year with every little units joined up together. And currently we have 54 units together, and working with the City Archive to understand the fundamental place and genius loci of Sheffield as a place, and obviously with Arts Tower, where I'm currently sitting in the near the center of the Arts Tower. So that is a brave meeting between Peter Bloom-Jones and Sheffield, and obviously he has been a founding a professor in architectural humanities at Sheffield, but also Sheffield made him to turn more into the focus on the rituals and ordinary life world of the people, and of course the pre-modern vernacular additive organic forms of settlements, and they are very rich, inclusive and diversified life worlds. So I'm going to look at his first and very last projects, 2 family houses. The first roundhouse is done by him, just graduated from Architecture Association in the mid-70s, designed a house for his parents, and the other one is designed for his own family when he moved to Sheffield, the Putney Mill. And I see the 2 houses as one because they all share the similar principles, the similar fundamentally methodological approach, which we will see that is focused on the living room as a central organization of the daily ritual of a family, but also wanted to make a collection between the very lesser known roundhouse, a relatively more known Putney Mill, because there are a few publications about that so far already, and most of the materials based on the recently opened Peter Bloom-Jones archive, so they are the first time to meeting the wider audience. So this is the site plan 1:200 about the Dorven village, with the site here, which you can see. This is the hatched area. It's a very generous site, and it has a subtle level change. So working with the topography, but also trying to locate a family space within a kind of a wilderness, within a kind of very nature-based environment is the starting moment, and that is the starting moment of this roundhouse here. So the key sketch at the early stage, you can see that the idea of the central circular form, that is the living room, and everything is surrounding and organized by this living room, because this is the central core of the room. And that is also his inspirations from Hans Jaron or Hugo Herring in terms of, for example, the Gagaku farm, looking at the plan, at the spatial generator of the plan, but also looking at the rationale of the plan based on the daily routines and the movement of the users. And also you can see this idea of extended walls into the garden, into the nature, and with semi-enclosed, semi-public space here and there, and some for car parks, some for the garden, some for the channels and the ramp around, and they all come together, blurring the boundary between the interior and exterior. And that is the early model he made for this model, obviously to convince his clients, his parents. And that is the roof structure plan, which represents that of the plan, centered on the circular movement and articulate the space of arrival, space of transition, and space of the gallery in a whole coherent approach. And that is, it is at its built and flexible library. He participated in the construction himself, always working with the masons and with subcontractors, and also keeps the cost as very, very low at that time. I think the full cost of this project was only 30K at that time. That is as built, and you can see that very lightly, gently curved partition walls, expanding the building into the external, but also always having a window frame, bringing the view from inside to the outside, but articulated in the different levels of the roof, bringing the daylight coming from the top and the high side. This is the main space of arrival, the channeling you into a central welcoming space. And then this is the heart, the hearth of the family life, with the fireworks built into this wall, and also the long built-in sofas alongside, and always in a circular and organic relationships, the objects. And you can see the roof ceilings, exposed structures that remind of the works of our artists in the town hall. And always this the kind of different ideas and languages being synthesized and reconciled in this specific site for the specific clients by Peter Bloom-Jones. This is his very first ever built project, and it wins some small awards, and it got some published in this is a building design magazine in 1977, a year after its completion. And you can see that it's inspired by Hans Jaron, and it's one of the circular houses in the country at that time. So the central idea of the family house, centered by a firework, but also the hearth, the living room as a core to organize is a ritual of the daily life. And this is the fundamental methodology and thinking Peter Bloom-Jones translated 20 years later near Sheffield in a small village called Greenford, that he bought a decayed 18th century industrial mill from auction and reused it into his family house, which he lived until this year by the family. And this is the site from the ordinary survey, and that is the moments and as found objects from the site. And that is the house from the distant way. By the way, this is a conservation area, and the house is listed 2 buildings. So lots of the interventions are happening inside. So the
Excuse me, 1 minute, please.
Sorry.
Excuse me. 1 minute, please.
All right, no problem. I will be very quick. Yes, it's all very general. So this is a bird view, and that is the first drawing of the intervention, articulate the topography and establish the territory. And the left is the postcard drawing a photograph of the building in 1950s, 60s as a cafeteria, and now it is a family house reused. And the plan, you can see a 6-degree screw of the stairs leading central to the living room and the kitchen, and that is a key idea of the plan layout, which you can see from here, a new steel structure intervention into the existing shell, and that is the staircase, and that is the one looking to the living room and the kitchen, which you will see the kitchen itself is an intervention articulating different levels of the water and making the water downstairs into the kitchen. And that is the first floor when you are going up, and this is open plan, and there's a built-in sofa again hanging into the atrium, the double higher space with reference from Hans Scharoun's work a lot, and that is looking out. This is the cross-section looking to the archaeological site, Belize, and this is some moments and fragments he collected and exposed in the construction, but also in the daily life. On longitudinal cross-section to the garden, and the sofa building on the upper floor, Plan Libera. And that is a construction of the garden with articulation of the territory, architecture at its most elemental, and memories being built in with local visitors and beautifully offering to the hand and fingers, these detailings seen a lot in Scandinavia traditions too. So I want to finish by these slides a little bit in a rush, that the home and the wall and the built criticism, to following his idea of architecture and rituals, that architecture provides a mirror that reflects our world and our knowledge and about it, and it's the way we interacted it. And in David Lee's obituary for Peter Bloom-Jones, is that I think that is his feeling, but also a lot of our feelings, that I feel that the threads of the life collecting me to a bright, optimist view of the world in which architecture as an outward form of a well-ordered society could make a profound and positive differences to people's lives are being cut one by one. And hopefully this is a clarity of the vision from Peter Bloom-Jones, which can all continue as a collective legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please stop the sharing. Thank you. Any questions or comments? We still have some minutes before the interval, so there is a question in the chat. Let me read it. Interesting presentation. Could you comment on that convex sofa in the parents' house? Does not look very friendly behavior. From Carlos Comas.
Thank you very much, Carlos. If I understand right, not very friendly. I think that is mostly based on the central idea of to directing people into the family room, the living room, and sit down together facing the firework. And I think that is the idea of that long built-in sofa to develop as a long bench. I think that's seen a lot in early modernist work, particularly in Alvar Aalto's work and Hans Scharoun's work. And I think that coming from from that standing point.
One question more? Please.
I have a comment. Many thanks for your presentation. It's useful that you showed the first house. I mean, it really was the format asking contributors to concentrate on one building, but I think in this case it was quite useful, because otherwise I think one would not have understood the significances of the various very subtle interventions that Peter Blundell-Jones made in the mill. But having said that, it seems that the existing building acted as a critique of the critic. So that is, there is a kind of a tempering of the critic that has occurred, not only because of the conservation aspect of the building, but I think he also became wiser and less, shall we say, expressionistic.
Yeah, exactly. Wilfried, thank you. Yeah, the second house, the Paddy Mill, is more restrained and exploring the indoor qualities and working with the existing stone shell of that existing mill, and to celebrate the weight of the weight, sense of the weight, and working with some single glazing. And I think it's providing a good way of adaptive reuse and also kind of modern retrofit, instead of like you said, express a lot in formal language. I think it's back into more into his understanding of architecture as a human discipline, and his lifelong critique of architecture needs to be returning to a central understanding of the use of the people and their routines and the daily rituals. Yes, exactly. And I think to see the first house and make a collection of the second would be that's my intention to do. That's why I said I see the two as one, not as two projects.
Okay. We have now scheduled an interval. It's okay to now.
Yes.
Yes.
And
So we are
10
shortly
minutes.
behind schedule. Okay, so 10 minutes interval. Now is 10:30. Well, 10:30 in Brazil. Not well. It's something 13 in everywhere. And so we'll go back in 10 minutes. Something 23 everywhere. You add the number of your place. So thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody back. Let's wait for everybody to come in. Well, thank you. We are going to continue with the presentation of Luisa Gonçalves. Luisa Gonçalves is an architect and urbanist from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She holds a bachelor's degree in architecture and urbanism from the Federal Fluminense University from 2012, a master's degree from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in 2015, and a PhD from the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism in the University of São Paulo in 2020. Her research focuses on the relationship between architecture, infrastructure, and the metropolis through mobility facilities, stations, terminals, considering both urban planning and design scales. As an architect, she has primarily worked on architectural projects in various scales in offices in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, and more recently has been involved in projects of São Paulo expanding metro system. Thank you very much, Luisa. You have 15 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute to finish. Luisa, you may share your presentation. It's Luisa, please open your mic and please share your presentation. Are you hearing me? I believe there is some problem.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear. Yes,
I can't
now.
hear you. I'm trying to correct my phone.
I have already introduced you, and you need your presentation now.
I'll make it here. Well, if you can hear me, I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but it's, yeah, please put it on full screen mode, please. Control L.
I'm trying just to put it on full screen. Which, if you can write
Visualizar tela cheia. Visualizar modo de tela cheia. Embaixo, mais embaixo. Mais embaixo. Não, aí não, do lado de lá. Visualizar modo de tela cheia. Clica de novo em visualizar em modo de tela cheia e desce o cursor até embaixo. Nós não estamos vendo ainda.
Well, I'm going to start, okay?
It's not full screen shared.
Here when I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, so
but if everything's okay, can you just do it like this?
It's a little bit. It's shorted. It's cut somehow, so it's not very good. But we can see it.
Can you not go to Visualizar? Open that.
Desculpe, posso ser ao lado da percentagem, do lado direito, experimente clicar. Tem ali um retângulo. Tem a percentagem. Em cima.
Também pode ser Ctrl L que você consegue a tela cheia. Ctrl L.
Can you hear me? Fine?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear you.
Can you hear us? She's not hearing us.
Okay. So
Okay, now
I'm
it's
going
okay.
to begin.
Yes, it's
My name is Luisa Gonçalves. I'm honored to be here. My work is on the subway system of São Paulo. I'm really not sure if you can hear me. If anyone can answer me on the chat.
yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm recording my time now. This paper considers our public transportation architecture may be considered as a good criticism able to promote the reflections on urban society daily life. Everyday spaces such as subway stations, generally built by public entities for collective use, may convey a deep understanding on how to promote policies for the use of common people, contributing to enhance the collective perception of good and valuable public spaces. Usually, transportation design is a part of a urban planning and it addresses issues of accessibility and equality throughout cities. However, this paper will focus on their architectural dimension. Subway stations are primarily designed for their functional aspects as transportation nodes. They gather a large number of people passing by, especially in connection stations and intermodal terminals. They also present numerous interesting opportunities, defining places for public encounters and further city engagement, as is the case of the São Bento station, located in the historical core of the city of São Paulo in Brazil. The station design was the responsibility of architect Marcelo Fragelli and his team, developed when designing the very first subway line in Brazil. It has been considered a significant modern and brutalist architectural landmark for its historical and cultural value. Fragelli's work presents several aspects that point architecture as built criticism. That happens by turning the stations not only in places for transit, but as public spaces, some of them configuring major squares. Fragelli and his team opened the stations from its interior out, frequently bringing natural light to the underground spaces, integrating gardens and fixed furniture, allowing people to a more pleasant and metropolitan spatial experience. Line 1 blue stations are also statements encouraging a deeper appreciation of the potential of transportation architecture to shape the public realm and foster critical conversations about the built environment roles in society. São Bento station is in the middle point of Line 1 blue of São Paulo metro system. It is located near several important foundational landmarks, such as a valley called Anhangabaú, which is an indigenous name for the small river that crossed that area, also the São Bento Monastery, and a major square called Sé, which refers to the Catholic Archbishopric, in the central area of São Paulo. It is one of the 23 stations of Line 1 Blue, and estimated 40,000 people use its premises at rush hour. In the 1980s, it hosted the city's initial slam and hip-hop gathering until the movement outgrew the space and moved to bigger ones. In 2019, the subway company has licensed the station into a shopping mall company called Patio to establish a commercial area inside it, a future that was already planned by its initial design. After the renewal, The original architecture was mostly preserved, and at the main plaza, a metallic pergola was added, as you can see in this image. Despite serving only one metro line, the station has 5 different accesses due to its unique position in the city. The foundational core of the city is over a small triangular hill, surrounded and limited by 3 valleys, where each corner corresponds to a different religious order premises: the Benedictines, the Franciscans, and the Jesuits. Even though São Bento Station's main entrance is in the plaza in front of the Benedictines monastery, it may be discreetly accessed by the surrounding streets. Every entrance is in a different topographical level, giving the station a particular characteristic of being a possible pedestrian shortcut connection through the irregular and steep immediate surroundings. The main plaza access is a large multi-level square defining a significant excavated architectural space surrounded by a perimeter wall that may be used as a balcony to look below, revealing the metro entrance, and creating a sunken plaza surrounded by small shops and cafes. All the architectural elements were carefully designed. The main stairs define a monumental spiral in dialogue with round-shaped gardens, offering the passing by public a gradual transition between the upper street level and the underground station. The sunken plaza solution allows its monumental tree without visually competing with the surrounding historic monuments. Also, it is organized in plateaus filled with gorgeous benches and different opportunities to sit and enjoy the place, the small bars and other commercial establishments. After the plaza, we find the standard architecture of the subway, with signalization conducting the public to the ticket offices, stairs, escalators, trains, and rails. It is interesting to highlight that the original design proposed a much bigger square, as the metro company intended to build its headquarters there, facing the Anhangabaú Valley. Ultimately, this part of the design was deferred for financial reasons and due to its historical environmental protection directive. The other São Bento station accesses show an opposite design strategy. There are small entrances camouflaged in the urban landscape of the block's facade, posing like regular buildings but sheltering escalators and gates to enter the metro system, the subway system. Although small, they show the same architectural features of the main square. They are built with apparent concrete walls illuminated by ceiling openings, allowing the entrance of natural light, and sometimes also have corners, a vocabulary that encompasses Marcelo Fragelis and the team leader architect understanding of what a valuable architecture for public use and collective use should be. Fragelis studied in Rio de Janeiro in the 1950s, a period of strong enthusiasm for modern Brazilian architecture. After practicing in Rio for some years, he transferred to São Paulo and became a key figure in the development of its first subway line, the first one in Brazil, which opened in 1974. At that moment, São Paulo urbanization had already extended into a huge metropolitan area. Throughout the state of São Paulo and the country, transportation infrastructure and urban mobility issues were being enhanced with the design participation of several important architects. For instance, here we can see the central bus terminal in Brasília, which is the capital nowadays, by Lúcio Costa, and the city of Jaú Interstate Bus Terminal by João Batista Villanova Artigas. The infrastructure architecture of that period was producing spaces for collective use that had aspects of monumentality, in close dialogue between structural engineers and the architectural team. They were able to elevate the transportation infrastructure features into architecture and urban landmarks. It was an experimental work, so Fragelli and his team felt the need to establish a set of principles to be applied. The station's composition should be in dialogue with the structural elements, displaying the true nature of each material, not only as a plastic choice, but also as a philosophical stance that would, in his opinion, better define the public characteristic of the internal and external spaces. In other words, it was deemed inappropriate to cover the concrete elements, ceilings, pillars, and beams, as it was not understood just as a regular interior space, but instead as the underground guts of the city itself, where the sustaining walls should show the force of grain scale. Another principle was to allow the natural light entrance as much as possible in the underground levels of the station. That would allow passengers to directly relate to the time of the day and would soften the claustrophobic effect of the underground situation. Fragelle had visited the subway systems of some European cities and considered the long corridors connecting the interior spaces faulty, something to be avoided. So he wanted the stations to open as much as possible to the exterior, breaking the underground spaces into multiple levels, creating a gradual transition between interior and exterior from street level to underground. Another principle was to introduce gardens in the station, an unusual treat in subways, made possible to define and maintain thanks to the subtropical climate of São Paulo. The gardens were implemented not only on the surface or entrances of the stations, but also ticket halls, mezzanines, and even along platforms whenever possible. They were frequently delimited by large concrete benches, open for the public to sit. In conclusion, I'd like to highlight that this principle converged on the proposal to make the stations a place for possible, a space possible for permanence, beyond its direct use as passages or connections to the subway system. It is possible to understand the nodes of transportation systems both as network nodes and as preeminent places in the city. This way, Fragelle and his team works on Line 1 Blue of São Paulo metro system opened the possibility of considering the stations as public places of a metropolitan scale. In special opportunities for public encounters and engagement with the city, enriching the urban experience itself. Was just the end. I'd like to thank Ruth for the dialogue and help with this presentation. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luisa. We had some technical problems, but I believe you could hear everything. But if you have any doubts, you can make some questions now or some comments. Who would like to say something or to comment? Yes, Luis, please.
Yes, I enjoyed your presentation. Luisa, can you hear me? Okay, I enjoyed your presentation, and there's like 2 points. One that you just made at the end by passing by, because your presentation on this metro stations is about the openness and the greenery. And just at the end, you said, yes, because we have a subtropical climate. And I think that is at the beginning of it. If you didn't have that, you couldn't have the rest. And then the other, I think you, or maybe I didn't understood it or got it. I didn't see the criticism of this building clearly, or this open spaces. What are they, or how are they criticizing?
We can't hear you, Luisa. Would you please, hide the volume. Sobe o volume da. No, we can hear. Maybe your earpiece is faulty. Maybe. No. Technical problems. It happens.
If there is not a technical problem, it is not a good meeting.
No. And nothing is as perfect as it should be. It will be in some years or a century more.
Luisa, can you hear us?
Yes, but we can't hear you. I'm sorry. Please write in the chat. Please write your answer in the chat. Maybe. Or we can continue. Maybe if you are having technical issues, we can go on to the next presentation because we're already on time, and then you solve that, and we can keep on this discussion later. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe Luisa, you should go out and come back in again, and hopefully the connection is better.
Okay. So let's go last but not least at all. Let me see sorry, I did not open the Horacio Torrent. Well, sorry for the delay. Now it's my technical problem. No, I can't open. Well, I will say it by heart. Horacio Torrent is professor at the University of Pontifical University of Chile. He was an architect from National University of Rosario. He is a member of Docomomos and will be sharing the next Docomomo conference in Chile, in Santiago de Chile, next to this December 2024. I'm sorry, I'm not finding your curriculum, but he is very well known and a very good critic and has a lot of books and texts published. And he's going to talk about on built criticism, public buildings and power, architecture, and the UNCTAD 3 in Santiago de Chile. Please begin, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Wilfred. Thank you for accepting this paper. I'm starting with the statement. Buildings have intrinsic characteristics proposing language structures that underlie their formal structure. Languages structures can migrate their critical meanings concerning the historical time and the space in which the life of buildings occurs. Critical meanings are a constitutive part of buildings through socialization, the production and meaning of meanings, and the historical experience. They are a consistent part of the buildings as cultural objects, and the forms or shapes are the relevant evidence as much as the forms of reading that they propose to people, that is, to whom the critical is directed. But it seems to be a condition that manifests itself with greater hierarchy in a particular building category, the public buildings, and mainly in the public buildings related to power. The complex for the UNCTAD 3, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, was built in Santiago de Chile in 1972. The organization of the conference in Chile was a proposal from President Frey, and when accepted was faced by President Allende. The conference was the third of a new institutional effort of the United Nations organization facing the challenge of development. In Chile was promoted by Felipe Herrera, a Chilean economist who will be the prominent official of the international order for so many years. The political challenge lies in holding the conference for what would be known as the Chilean way to socialism that the government of Salvador Allende was facing at the time. And this implied both facing the organizational aspects of the conference and the construction of the space for the conference that Chile did not have until that time. There was no building capable of hosting a conference of that size, nor were there so many options to locate a new building in a significant location in Santiago. The place finally chosen would be in an area still available in the great urban intervention or urban renewal intervention known as San Borja, was close to the city center and La Moneda Palace, the presidential palace, which are marked here. It was an urban renewal program, began under Fray Montalva government by the Corporación de Mejoramiento Urbano, CORMU, which after the demolition of an old hospital include the construction of 23 towers and a large for residences, a large park, and the cultural and commercial center. Here are the photo montage of the urban renewal and the plan, and the area was I'm marking here was this area and in the main way of the city, the Alameda path. But the building complex should also be complete in extremely short term. The conference was scheduled for April 1972, and the Allende presidential period began on November 1970. That means 18 months for design and construction. The main idea was to make a large roof that would eliminate the possibility of construction delays due to climatic reasons and continue buildings under the roof, the main rooms for the conference. The design comprised a tower 70 meters high and a horizontal megastructure 180 meters long, supported by 16 monumental columns. Was designed by the architects José Kovacevic, Hugo Aguero, Juan Echenique, José Medina, and Sergio González, and under the idea of José Pepe Medina, who was collaborating at the time at the Kevin Roche and John Dinkeloo office for the construction of the New Haven Coliseum of the Knights of Columbus headquarters, and was back in Chile at that time. As you can see, the main idea was the high roof supposed by the monumental columns in which resides the relation with the urban scales of the building. The columns in the center of the architectural reflective approach for this building was in the center. The columns were in charge of giving the building its monumental scale related to the institutional significance in order to accommodate an international conference. The entrance was also another part that assumed public status and significance. The building includes the tower for the secretariat and the horizontal structure for the main rooms of the conference with a basement dedicated to serving the delegates' needs. In the plans of the horizontal building, you can see the main rooms at the right and others two at the left. and the access entrance in the center with the great stairs. The section is clear in the organization of the different levels. The drawings reveal that the orders of columns were completely exposed and the rooms were inside the horizontal roof. In the first floor, basement was the services for the delegates and the journalists and the translators. The tower, in fact, repeated the plan of the residential towers from the San Borja urban renewal because the know-how for the construction already exists and should be quickly and efficient. As I already mentioned, the construction was a tremendous challenge. The main structure was built in concrete and Corten steel. The building process started in 1971 and finished the 3rd of April of 1972, a few days before the inauguration, and it was considered as successful, completing 275 days of construction. The main of the process was the time that the steel roof truss was installed. There was a popular ceremony celebrating that moment, as has always been done in Chile when the roof of a house is complete. The name is Tijerales, and it took place in October 1971, a large lunch at open air for the workers and their families, accompanied by the president, his wife, and the entire government. Renowned artists made works of art for the buildings in a wonderful exercise of synthesis of the art and architecture. The artworks were everywhere, from the halls to the walls of the main rooms, from the lamps to the doors. One of the main artworks was the stained glass installed on the ceilings above the entrance from Juan Bernal Ponce, named Volantín, which means kite. On April 3 of 1972, Salvador Allende, President of Chile, and Kurt Waldheim, Secretary General of the United Nations, made the statements at the inaugural ceremony of the 3rd session of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The building was complete and showing national pride of having successfully completed one of the greatest challenges of the new era that means the Chilean way to socialism. The popular consecration came when at the end of the conference, the building became the Metropolitan Cultural Center, named Gabriela Mistral, honoring the first literary Nobel Prize of a Chilean poet, but mainly when a restaurant for the delegation located at the basement became a popular dining room for 600 people per shift, and served around 2,000 lunches every day, and also became the place for demonstrations supporting Allende's government when things got difficult. But, as is very well known, on September 11, 1973, was the coup and the bombing and destruction of the La Moneda Palace, the presidential palace, and the traditional seat of power. Because of the distraction, which is plenty related with the bombing, the military board took the power, which took the power, had no facilities, so the UNCTAD building was occupied and started the process of new signification. The dictatorship regime looks the building as a very good place to settle the power. It seems that the shape of the building, the monumentality, and also its novelty have the capacity to signify the new powerful regime. So many celebrations of the CAP were celebrated in front of the building. And also the building became a certainly usual place for the military. From 1973 to 1982 was the seat of the dictatorship power. Then became the place for the legislative power exercised by the military board, namely the junta. Because of that, at the end of the regime, also was place of demonstration asking for the missing people. Occupied by the defense of ministry since the return of democracy, an opportunity to change the signification became with the building fire and on March 2006. The destruction of part of the building prompted the Bachelet government to call for an international architectural competition in 2007. The winner of the architectural competition was the design led by Cristian Fernández Eizaguirre, Sebastián Barahona, and Christian Jutronic. The design converted the old building in adaptive reuse for cultural facilities. Among many other aspects, the design that I will not explain here, two of the main changes came with the disappearance of the staircase, making possible to enter directly at the level of the urban ground. And the second, and probably the most important in the resignification of the building, came with the new treatment of the columns. The surface proposed for the facade warped the columns in a kind of skirt, lowering their height and altering the proportions at the main urban facade. The new Gabriela Mistral Cultural Center was finally inaugurated in 2010, and since has become the most important cultural facility of the country. During its historical time experience, the formal characteristics of the building were helpful in different political, social, and even ideological ways. The last architectural design and adaptive reuse of the structures assumed the critical readings promoted by the building in its vicissitudes and changed its qualities by operating of the historical imagination deployed around its architecture. As built criticism, the new design successfully transformed the meanings established through history. A new scale, assigned by new full access at the city level and by the fact of wrapping the columns by the new facade surface, came from a clear reading of the vicissitude of the building in a clear exercise of built criticism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Horacio, just in time. Would you please share? Okay, wonderful. João, some questions. João has raised his hand. Yes, please, João.
Yes, I would just like to know what is your opinion, Horacio, on the finishings of the renovation, because when I visit this building, for me it's really impressive, the form and the scale. It's really monumental. I don't know the name of the street, but there's like a small street behind the building in which you come from the neighborhood and you just see the roof floating, and it's very impactful and monumental. But when I reached the building itself, I don't know. I thought the metal screens chosen as finishing was kind of vulgar. I don't know. For me, I felt the same thing when I visit the municipal market, like the new one with those inverted pyramid roofs. I don't know. I think it kind of, this metallic covers kind of took away the monumentality of the structure.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think all the efforts of the new design were put on the surface of the facade. Oh, actually, now on the old building has all the columns exposed, and the new one the surface is limiting the powerful proportion of the columns, because you cannot realize that there is columns behind the surface only by seeing this little pores of the metal surface. So the building is now in a new phase, building completing the building with the new theater. So one of the pictures now are not really the final view, but the building was very monumental with all the columns exposed, and it meant to be some kind of what can I say, of peatonalization of this area, just to leave the ground plenty to look at the building from behind. But it is impossible, because it is in the most important way of the country, I can say, the Alameda Bernardo Higgins. So it is impossible to have this place free of vehicles. So you have a path very narrow in front of the building, and it's a very high and speed way, so it's quite impossible to have distance to look at the columns. So I think they did a very good work doing this kind of skirt of the columns, just putting the columns behind.
Luis, please.
Yes, thank you, Horacio. I enjoyed very much how you explained how the building went through all the political changes in time, and how the last one is a criticism of what happened before. Do you think that, because that also is what I think, that the division of this huge building into 3 smaller parts is also a criticism of the grandiose time to come back to smaller parts?
Yes, I think it has huge effort also in the crystal surface inside, just to keep a kind of proportion of the building in the details, proportioning the building in the details. So I don't like the final result so much, but I think it was a huge effort of design just to reduce the effects of the monumentality of the former building into a new one that should be more acceptable for the people. And one of the main issues is the disappearance of the stairs, which was the main, what can I say, the main place used by the dictatorship at that time. And I saw a picture of Pinochet and his wife at that time, showing this kind of idea of a family thing in the monumental place. So the maintaining the floor at the same level of the urban area is one of the great decisions of the design.
Wilfred, please.
Yes, thank you, Horacio, for this very interesting presentation. It seems that there are certain kinds of continuities, and if one looks at the United Nations in New York, it has the hall and has another low-level building. So there are these horizontal slabs, and then there is a tower. So there's this kind of basic typology that, if you like, Harrison Abramovitz and Niemeyer and Le Corbusier's design sets as a kind of a background. The other background is the religious background of churches, where you have the temple front, and then you have a bell tower or some kind of tower next to it. And if you like, there's also the kind of connection to the Doric temple, or even the kind of more explicit relationship between the concrete cruciform support that, of course, goes also to Mies's New National Gallery. I think there's a very clear continuity between UNCTAD and New National Gallery. So there are these kinds of, if you like, continuities and overlaps and so on. And I think that the architecture of authority that is established in all these cases, United Nations and UNCTAD 3, is something that slipped very easily into Pinochet's lap as something that, you know, was thankfully received. And the process of redesign, I think, is a kind of an picturesque operation on something that is actually a sublime, or wants to be in the tradition of the sublime, as a kind of monumental object. And everything that it does, the current design, is splitting up the continuity of the horizontal line, the roof form, and obliterating the dominance of the 8 visible columns on one side and the 8 on the other. So it's a kind of literally kind of a paste and wrap, and but every move is intended not to create or not to strengthen the clarity of the overall volume. And so it's kind of a weakening of the horizontal base. And I think as a strategy, the redesign is a clear criticism of what had gone before, in order to try and make it more accessible and more palatable to the general public. So, I mean, I think that this is a very revealing political, or that the Bachelet's project, I think, is very clear. Where I don't understand Allende's original intention, why was he so infatuated by this expression of power? That, I think, is my key question.
I did some interviews many years ago, because this is a very long research project. I did it on 1960 to Carlos Albrecht, who was the director of architecture at the Ministry of Public Works of Salvador Allende. And I asked him what was the reaction when Allende visited the building in the first time with the huge beams already elevated to the columns, no? And it was so funny, because he did, well, Salvador Allende has no opinion about the buildings, and only asked, is this going to finally be like this? So that was the only idea. And he was very, what can I say? He was very mobilized, because of they are using the Corten steel, and the Corten steel, you know, it was not fabricated at that time in Chile. It was imported from the United States, and he said also, oh, this will be like a fashion expose of the steel. But actually, when the fire revealed that the Corten steel was only in the visible parts of the buildings, and all the inside part of the buildings were only in steel, in current steel. So he was no many understanding architecture as so many politicals in the world. You know, it was only like a vision of idea, not directly related. But I can add a new layer, because Jose Kovacevic was a communist, was from the Communist Party. You know, this is a mix. It's one if Christian Democrat, one is socialist, one from the Communist Party, one from the right. It was a very mix, just to goal the final construction of the building. It's really that. One had the contacts with the company's construction and everywhere. And Jose Kovacevic was the winner of the architectural competition for the new Congress built in Valparaiso by Pinochet. And he was from the political left, but quite, you know, the Communist Party was, what can I say, always was a Stalinist in Chile. So the monumental ideas were there.
Before passing the floor to Ana Tostões, I would like to say that we have already opened the round table, the final round table. So if you have questions or comments about the first presentations, you can pose them to the other presenters. And I remember that we still have the Morten Birk question to Algimantas and etc. We'll have time for that too. So I'll pass the floor to Ana now.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I would like to celebrate Horacio Torrent presentation. I'm sorry, I was traveling and I was not able to assist to the previous contributions, but at least this one was in fact for me very enlightening, the issue of this conference, because it points out a question very sharp, very delicate, which is the basis of architecture, which is the relation with power. And at the same time, I would say the power, and quoting Wilfrid, the duty of the criticism. It was the first motto. And concerning this Gabriela Mistral Centro Cultural, it comes to my mind why it was not possible to restore even with the adaptations, the contemporary adaptations to the contemporary rules or materials if they were problems, but to assume the idea of a rehabilitation and not a transformation. Why I believe this was not possible, because the critics or the criticism was not active to, I would say, show that the original layout, I don't like the word layout, the original concept and the original building was in fact of great quality and very interesting. And the fact that a building is used and in a way goes through a metamorphose with the use. So in a way it represents the democracy, and as you explain, a democracy that was not very happy with the building. So a kind of socialism very much connected. Perhaps Allende was not very educated in terms of architecture. I never thought about this, but now I realize. But he could think about Niemeyer, and Niemeyer at this time was in France, and he was making Le Siège du Parti Communiste and so on, and struggling, let's say, the Stalinist rules. But this is very interesting to relate with the right and with the left. At the same time, the questions of monumentality, it seems to be a point where the criticism, it's hard to be involved and to transform the minds, I would say. In my hometown in Lisbon, recently we had a quite of struggle concerning the Paulo Mendes da Rocha Coches Museum. So the majority of the people say, oh, this is too Brazilian. Oh, this is from São Paulo. We don't like it. Oh, this is not for us. And the funny thing, I got terrible discussions saying, no, you are not understanding, and so on. And I would say that 10, 12 years after, people is now peacefully accepting and finding several qualities, even urban qualities, in the generosity of the public spaces and so on. But let's come back to Chile and to our...
Would you like to finish your question, because we
yes,
have to...
My question is, at what point buildings are so much connected with different powers, and if you think that this is a transitory position or situation, because, for instance, we talk about churches or incredible, let's say, monuments from the ancient times. Now people accept them as monuments without connecting the authorities. I don't know if I was perhaps not much clear, but...
It's okay. Horacio, would you like to...
Yes, it's very short. You know, the new times of in 2010, we were in the new times of the 20 years left, but there was what can I say, a kind of very good idea of the future of the country. Now it's completely different, but at that time it was, and the idea of what can I say, cleaning the building from the meanings of the dictatorship was pretty appreciated at that time, and also it had a very, what can I say, a very important issue related to the reconstruction or the restoration of so many materials which were used very, what can I say, very in a kind of industrialization that it was not already now here, and it's a kind of problem. We deal with the fabrication of architecture of the 70s. You know, there's no more the possibility to restore as an artisan way. It was only produced by industry, and the industry is not anymore with us. So that is the main problem at that time. And the idea was the completely renovation of the meanings of the building, of the complex. Yeah.
Thank you. Horacio's contribution was really very, very interesting, but we still have the other 4 contributions, and I would like to give the floor to Morten Birk. If you want to rephrase your question, to remind us of your question, and to Algimantas to answer it, please.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, what I think I was trying to say is that I'm curious about this question of time. Many of these examples, we look back in time and try to understand what kind of criticism the works may have been suggesting or expressing. And I think both Yifei here today and also Trent yesterday suggested that architecture may always be an act of criticism, like built architecture, if I'm not wrong. And I'm curious about this argument in relation to the question posed in the call for the conference about whether architecture can at all be criticism, considered a critical expression. So I think Algimante's example here was interesting because it was one that already, when built, was an obvious controversial proposal as an act of build criticism. So that's why I was considering, do we still see these examples, maybe in particular between Estonia and Lithuania, or I mean, obviously not the same, because this was a very particular typology with an embassy, but still, this question of time, do we see that today, or in contemporary architecture in the same way?
Would you?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So to continue on what I wanted to say to answer to this question, thank you, Morten, for the question. I will start specific and then go broadly. So I would say that Lithuania has and Estonia has changed, and we can discuss the stylistic appearances. But what I wanted to convey with the Estonian embassy's example is that the building has caused a change in the way the architects see themselves, their profession, and I see it as well in the European-wide Mies van der Rohe Award, for example, being it given to the Belgian office Architecten de Wilderwinkel with their open garden.
Some technical problem? We can't hear you anymore, Algimantas.
Others can see architects themselves, how they reflect. So that would be my my answer, that it continues, and yeah.
We lost quite a minute of your speech, so
okay.
Anybody wants to question something there?
Should I repeat, or
can you repeat the last part, the last
part.
two or three sentences?
Okay. It was just as you were talking about Wilderwink architecture.
Yes, so going from a specific example in Lithuania, the styles are changing, the appearances are getting more modern, but I think the Estonian embassy was really prominent in the fact that it changed the way local architects see themselves. And I also see a parallel to contemporary architecture in Europe with the Mies van der Rohe Award for the last couple of years.
Mies van der Rohe Award is censoring us. Every time we mention it.
Clinic. No.
Again, it was cut, but we got the sense that you feel like it's coming again, this kind of criticism in contemporary moments, as exemplified by the Mies van der Rohe prizes in Europe. We could understand.
Yes.
Basically, we lost some words also again. And going back to Louise, question to Luisa about the criticism, and would you like to answer something, Luisa? Luisa, Brazilian Luisa, not Mexican Louise.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, so now we
Mhm.
can.
I'm really sorry. Before I had a Bluetooth earplug, but the battery went off, so I changed everything here. Thank you, Luis, for your question. 2 points. The climate thing, I think, yes, it is a premise, but also it is the standard premise for every design in the city, and that is not the case that every design opens up and has this subtle transition between closed places and open ones. And concerning the criticism, I think we have to look that normally the infrastructure and urban plans, there was common to make the vehicles like the protagonist. And what the subway stations of First Line in São Paulo present is the pedestrian as the protagonist of that space. As they make the stations, they turn them into public squares, they turn them into metropolitan squares, because the basic program there is just the escalators and access to the subway system, to the underground. And there are many possibilities and in this way. So what he does is to emphasize the necessity to make those spaces also places for permanence. And that's for me the main issue in as build criticism, to get the pedestrian and the users and the common people and the daily use people as protagonists, if that's clear.
Can I say something very quickly?
Okay.
To this. I understood it, but you have to underline it in what you say, saying this is the criticism, not just to talk about it. That was my intervention. I enjoyed very much your presentation, and I think those stations are fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I'll make sure it is rephrased to make it more clear for the publication. Thank you.
Wilfred, please.
Yes, I think that the issue is a fascinating one, because if you think about a network, an infrastructure network, we have nodes. And these nodes conceptually are points, central points. I use the word center deliberately. However, the São Bento station is an idea of extension, of expansion, of integration, and of continuity. And as such, the boundary between what the station is and what the city is completely dissolved. So there's a kind of a topographic engagement. There's a compositional strategy to diffuse literally the edges using vegetation. And I think that all these things, I think if you look at the compositional strategy, the design strategy, you will understand that everything is done to underline this idea of extension, spatial continuity with the city. And I don't know of many other railway stations or underground stations that do that in the world.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
There is a question from the audience in the chat. I will read it from Carlos Eduardo Comas. He says, I would like to make a comment taking the paper on the Rice University's buildings as my reference. It was a great presentation, but it lacked balance, according to Comas. The symbolical aspects of the historicist buildings were overemphasized at the expense of the performance qualities, the experience of shade and coolness through the arcades and mass and materials. Conversely, the experience of the lightness and filtered shade was overemphasized in the glass pavilions, while downplaying the formality that blends the new with the two-hold structures. Two-hold, I don't know, understand.
The little bit, the old structures.
Okay, thank you. Let us not forget that criticism is evaluation and can refer to both approval as disapproval. Would you like to comment on that, Yves Etienne?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely accept this comment, and I think it's fair. It's definitely fair to say that these two are very different buildings, but I would like to believe, at least from my own personal perspective, that these two buildings, even if they both have their aspect of symbolism as well as their kind of performative aspect, I would like to highlight the fact that it seems the kind of traditional buildings, even if employing devices like the colonnade, are kind of more inviting reading. It seems they kind of they're kind of inviting people to sort of investigate in their symbolism, versus the latter doesn't really quite employ this explicit symbolism that I guess we can both say they have some kind of symbolic ideas, or we can both read into them. But it seems to me that the former building has much more to be read. And I guess that's what I was mentioning, Benjamin. It seems the former traditional building, by employing these symbolism in the facade, is kind of demanding a concentration, a focus onto the facade, versus the latter building is kind of more inviting a distractive kind of interaction with the building. So we just use the building instead of focusing on what does the building really mean.
Well, that can be because you are taught that modern buildings are not symbolical.
I'm not saying modern buildings are not symbolical, but it seems they're less explicit.
No, we are taught to take modern buildings as not symbolical.
Yes, but I guess they are both symbolical, but how explicit they are. Like, I guess that's the question I'm more interested in.
Okay. Well, next, Elias Konstantinopoulos said that he agrees with Carlos' comment. Maybe it's the comparison of the two buildings was perhaps not so appropriate. I may use my position to say that, of course, for a 15-minute presentation, I think the author had to emphasize the differences. But maybe when you develop your text for publication, you can soften all this stuff and not be so antithetical, because they're actually these buildings, they have their qualities and differences. But maybe you're right, in a 15 minutes you had to cut short some aspects. At least that's what I read his paper, so I realized that too. I'm giving the floor to João. Oh, okay, sorry. João.
No, just a first comment. I kind of agree with Ife, because I understand, okay, modernism has always been symbolic, like Le Corbusier's buildings trying to have the form of a cruise liner and everything. But at the same time, I understand what he's saying, that there was an emphasized attitude in postmodernism regarding the analogy, and buildings were explicitly an analogy. And although I think in modernism there was this happened, but with a greater degree of ingenuity, they tried to hide it somehow. But yes, both were already symbolic. But postmodernism, I think, took this position to a very literal level. And I agree with what he said in the position of his lecture, that the other building tried to convey this symbolic meaning, but rather through effects and through a way more subtle way, which I think is related to contemporary architecture, rather than to explicit literal symbols, which I think also relates to a discussion we were having yesterday regarding the work of Ricardo Bofill. The first part of his career had this very subtle, it had a more subtle approach, and then later in his career, he went through this very kitsch projection of monumentality.
Thank you, João. Wilfried, please.
Yeah, I think we should, how can I put it? As one grows older and more aware of the kind of similarity of different the similarity of all the different approaches in wanting to express some kind of symbolism. Modern, so-called modernist architecture, from the extreme version of Hannes Meyer, who claimed that to represent anything was ridiculous, and therefore his architecture represented nothing, which is a representation. We should be aware that everything, everything is political, everything is a form of communication, whether you undercook it or not. And so the Brockstein Pavilion by Tom Pfeiffer is in the line of wanting to create these sublime pavilions. It's, if you like, it's like trying an attempt at the primitive heart. It stands in that line of Mies, except it's not black but white. And why make this huge overhang? This huge overhang is part of this idea of the sublime. So we should not, even though you're protected by relative youth, not fall into the trap that Carlos has indicated, that we should believe that there's such a thing that, as I think Christian Keres has said, 0-degree expression. No, everything is a form of expression. And therefore, it's important to recognize what is being tried to be expressed. And that's part of the role of the critic. So I think it's quite important maybe to highlight or even overemphasize what each is trying to do. And it's important to see that the Brockstein Pavilion is trying to suggest openness. But this openness in Rice is something to be enjoyed by people who are already admitted to Rice. It's not something that is to be enjoyed by people who are not admitted to Rice. So it's a kind of a typical salon socialist idea of openness, right? I mean, you talked a lot about the basis of Rice as being, funded by, on kind of from the proceeds of slave trade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, what is the ratio of blacks in Rice University or Hispanics? I don't believe it reaches the average demographic condition of the United States. So in that sense, a lot of the elite universities are trying to be more open. And, there's a kind of debate in the United States about that. And yet there is a kind of a institutional barrier to that, which the powers that be, the university authorities, are trying to overcome by projecting this idea of openness. I mean, that's my reading.
Yves?
If I may respond, yeah, I would totally agree. I am not defending or kind of advertising for Thomas Pfeiffer's oeuvre. And I'm regarding this topic of openness, it is definitely true that as an institution, as a private university, Rice, there are definitely much more to critique. Is, most of the students come from a very bourgeois background, and like I said, the pavilion in a sense is kind of justifying Rice University as a institution by presenting a much more seemingly open kind of vision, even if, like Professor Wang saying, it's still very close. But I guess part of that analysis that I was trying to make in my argument is that by presenting a glass facade, and also by not having an ID reader at the entrance, it kind of presents itself as a very open access building compared to most of other academic buildings on campus, which is completely closed. They are cladded by bricks and no one knows what's going on inside. And you need to be a Rice affiliate with an ID card to go in. The Brockstein Pavilion kind of presents itself as a scholarly kind of, presents itself with a kind of scholarly hospitality that seemingly opens to everyone, even if it's still perpetuating a bourgeois kind of intellectual institution that perpetuates the academic industrial complex for sure. And I guess in this sense, I want to kind of respond to this broader discussion about criticism in architecture and beyond. And I think this partly goes into my discussion of Brachsen Pavilion versus older buildings. It seems to express criticism, there are two ways. And these two ways have their own limits. For architecture to critique, there are certain things that architecture can critique. And, in Horacio's presentation, once the regime changed, even if the building wasn't meant for that kind of ideological context, it was inevitably fallen into serving a purpose that it wasn't supposed to serve. So it seems there is a limit of what architecture can do. But I think at the same time, to use language to produce text, to produce knowledge is also part of architects' career for a very long time. So it seems there's a limit for what architecture can critique, but there's also another limit of what writing or creating knowledge, holding conferences, holding pedagogies that can critique, that is equally valid, and it's equally part of the career of architects.
I would like to, yes, I would like to make not really a question, but more a comment to Jean Ren presentation too. Is he here? I'm not seeing him. Oh yeah, you're here, sorry. It's my screen. I think it was kind of a pity that you have such a large introduction and we could not really understand your point in the comparison of the two houses, because, well, of course we have 15 minutes and use it mostly for all the introduction, where everybody here has books from Peter Blundell-Jones. We know him a lot. And I would like to understand better, but of course the images were very, they spoke a lot and we could understand, but I would like really, I'm looking forward to read your paper when in the publication to better understand. So because it's quite, it's formally so different, the first house from the second house. So it's you say that it's the same house. It was a point to be better explained than you could have in your time. Could you do that shortly here, or maybe we have to wait for your text?
Thank you very much, Ruth. I think maybe better to wait for my text, but I think I think your comment is valid. I think. My 15 minutes is very challenging, but my intellectual challenge for this paper is it's not about whether architecture is a built criticism, but it's about to what extent architecture can become a built criticism, in particular for those ordinary house, for ordinary family. But of course, this is Peter Blundell-Jones' family house. So I'm interested to look at how an architecture critic designed his own family house in a critical way, and in which form that contribute back to his own criticism in the, like you said, organic modernism. So yeah, that's an interesting intellectual gap I would like to explore. But thank you very much, Ruth, for addressing this.
Trenton?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I also had a question for Professor Zhengren. This probably is a two-part question, maybe the first for Zhengren and the second for both Zhengren and Yifei Zhang. Similarly to Ruth, I was just curious if you could speak a little bit more about the particularities of Peter Blundell-Jones's buildings, in particular his lineage from Hugo Herring and organic modernism, many of those incredibly small, just a few degree inflections in walls or particularities of the way furniture was arranged in relation to each other, or arranged in the relation to the way people would face one another. If you have any examples in those buildings of what the particular purpose of those small inflections were, if I'm assuming they're much like Hugo Herring and in the Gut Garkau farm being finely tuned to the raking of hay or this incredibly organic functional specificity. And I'm also kind of interested in the contrast between that and the Brockstein Pavilion, which Brockstein Pavilion reads as a much more Miesian project. It's attempting to be a field condition that is more or less empty space with a series of nodes that are chairs or columns, and the walls are intended to be kind of porous and let people filter through and do what they will rather than be forced into a certain way of living or a certain way of arranging themselves. And I believe Mies and Hugo Haring were both colleagues and who both criticized each other verbally and with their architecture, one believing that architecture should not impose a particular way of living, that it should be a field condition that allows people to arrange themselves as they would like, and Haring very much disagreeing with that, that in favor of particularity. I'm just interested in your thoughts if you think one of these things should win out against the other, or if there is a middle ground between the two.
Jean-Bren, would you like to answer something?
Yeah, very quickly before if we can follow up, I think. Thank you very much, Trent. So I think for Peter Blown-Jones' two houses, the key is nothing is square or orthodox. So every little detail needs a subtle interpretation by the designer, who is also a critic, and that based on the daily use and how you as a family of 4 and 5, how you move from the doorway as a threshold and then go into the living room and sit down and situate as a family. I think that 6-degree shift is belonging to that. And similarly, in his earlier project, Roundhouse, like Professor Huang already said, that there's more expressive and looking at circular and looking at that way more like organic response to the movement. So I think it's always about that very subtle decisions on very specific small things, like the direction of the wall or the angle of the steel beam, and in order to articulate the threshold from the space of arrival to the space of transition, and finally landing into the space of gathering, which is the living room of 2 houses. Thank you.
It's a very nice discussion. We still have time for at least one question more because we have to finish soon. But the floor is open. Is there? Yifei?
Sorry, I guess I just want to quickly.
Oh, sorry. Would you like to, Yifei, just for a minute? Let's give the floor to Comas. Please, Comas.
Yeah, I just want to, sorry to insist, but actually I was more concerned about the performance, the performative qualities of the old buildings and with the symbolical qualities of the new building. I think that we should not overlook the fact that they are more intended to be read as Yang said, that they do provide shade, they do provide cool. And I'm talking by experience. I've been in the 3 buildings, in the buildings he mentioned. So the point I was also making was about, the issue, a fundamental issue is that criticism is evaluation. So it's actually about, being approving and disapproving as well. So I mean, that's what I was looking after.
Thank you, Comas. Yifei?
I will firstly respond to Trent's question a little bit about the comparison of Mies van der Rohe with the Brockstein Pavilion. I guess when you mentioned the kind of debate between Hugo Haring and Mies van der Rohe, is that it seems compared to Hugo Haring, Mies kind of have a kind of a rationalist approach to buildings where you have like a large space and you can divide it and for multiple different purposes, versus for Hugo Haring, every single space in detail is kind of accommodating a very specific function. And I guess that you mentioned the similarity between Mies and Brauxton Pavilion is maybe the project that you have in mind is the Neue National Gallery in Berlin. But I would push back a little bit because these are two different projects with very different scale. The Neue National Gallery is a very, very big building. It's more than 2,000 square meters. And the Brauxton Pavilion is a very small building. It only has one cafe. It's less than 500 square meters. So I would say even if it kind of presents itself with a kind of seemingly filled condition, kind of blank space that waiting to be occupied, it's actually very small for that flexibility to happen. Yeah, and I definitely agree with everything that Professor Eduardo Camas was saying, and I would agree with the fact that there are kind of performative or climatic kind of a condition of the older buildings, and as well as there are symbolism for the newer buildings of Brauxton Pavilion, but I'm kind of speaking from a more everyday perspective, but the average users on the Rice University campus, their interaction with these two buildings, it seems that the previous building serves a more explicit kind of agenda of projecting these images, these ideas, these messages in a textual way, because there are literally texts that are inscribed on the building through the symbolism as well through literal text. But the latter building at least presents itself in a much more kind of subtle way of presenting its own ideologies and its own messages.
Well, there is a question or a comment in the chat that we have passed, but I would like to emphasize again. It's from Maria Valeria Bernabel, and it's addressed to Professor Horacio Torrent. And she says, I enjoyed your presentation, Horacio, thanks, and it raises a question for me, for her. It seems that the latest intervention is intended to hide the part of the memory of that building, perhaps because the people prefer it that way, but should it be that way? She's questioning or asking for your opinion, at least. Would you like to answer?
Thank you, Maria Valeria, for your question. I don't know if it should be that way. I know it was that way, and the intention of the paper is related with the build criticism. So the idea of the criticism incorporated in the new design is fundamental for my ideas. It was that way. It was a huge, what can I say, debate on the way to replace or renew or also restore that building. But it was really in a very bad condition for so many years, mostly because of the electricity that started the fire of the building. So it was a huge debate. It was an international competition, and there were results by a jury, and it was approved, and the building is very performative for the people, and the people are very, what can I say, very happy with the building, using it in a very intense way. So I cannot ask for me, it's not very relevant a question if to a, what can I say, to a theoretical idea of restoring or not. You know, the societies own these buildings, and the societies want to, what can I say, pace the page, move the page to a different situation, and it was very hard to live in the dictatorship, and it was very hard to live with the dictator in democracy, and it's now going to another phase of the people. So I was trying to intend the build criticism by the designers of the new design, of the last design of the cultural center. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Or else I will give the floor to Wilfred, perhaps to summarize, and thank you. It's not open, the micro.
Let me try just a couple of sentences of summary. We've seen, I think, very interesting presentations today and previously. And if one connects to Horacio's point, for example, in Germany, we've had cultural buildings. At the center of Berlin, we had a palace over 100 years ago. It was destroyed during the East German regime. It was bomb damage during the Second World War, and it was demolished. Then the East Germans constructed a Palace of the Republic when the two countries were reunited. The West, the victors of the reunification, decided to pull down the building. That was not very popular in East Germany or in the eastern part of Berlin. Yet the protests were ignored. The building of the East Germans was knocked down, and instead there is now a reconstruction of a facade with a modernist concrete core at the inside. So the upshot of this comment and the upshot of, I think, Horacio's point is essentially there are two very crude levels or extreme sides of criticism, built criticism. One is a constitutive, performative, effective criticism that is built, that actually affects change in behavior. On the other hand, there is a symbolic one, a representative one. Really, that is not in any way effective, but it sort of plays on people's minds and their populist preferences and so on. But actually, it does not change the everyday of living. So these kinds of extreme ways of seeing things, on the one hand, representative criticism, and on the other hand, constitutive criticism, I think are useful ways, perhaps, to understand the different approaches and different significances of the examples that we've seen. So, and I'd like to thank everyone, including Ruth, for her wonderful session chairmanship or chairship, and for all the authors who have contributed. But I'll leave the last word to Ruth.
Well, I would like to thank Wilfred for all this idea of this international criticism conferences, which we are already in the third year, and rest assured there will be a fourth and a fifth, and as long as we can do it. And thank you for your contributions. There will be a book also in the end of the process of all this. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to put in question what is criticism and how it is necessarily collaborative. We are all here to talk and to hear about and to discuss, and this is the most democratic way of doing things. Criticism sometimes is confounded, thinking as somebody giving orders to other people how to act, which is just the contrary. It's a debate. It's the exchange of ideas, and sometimes contradictory ideas, but it's part of the game. And we are very happy that you all are here, and I'm sure we'll be again and again for many years to come. Thank you very much, Wilfred, and everybody and the ONG University that sponsored this meeting, all these 4 meetings. And see you soon, some part in the world, and next year is for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Good time to everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Tchau, beijinhos.
Beijinhos a todos e todas.
Adeus, Ruth.